Hey, everybody, welcome to the Starting a Counseling Practice podcast. I get to interview Ronald Ma today, who's going to be sharing his story of starting a private practice. He's actually someone that I did some consulting sessions with, meaning like I hired him years ago to ask some questions and get some support. And he was part of my journey as well. So I'm really delighted to have him here today to share his story. And if you're following along online, RonaldMah.com, if you want to go and check out his website. Welcome, Ronald.
Hey, welcome. Good to talk to you again.
Good to talk to you too.
You,
Do you
you,
want
you
to?
know, let me just say that um, I was thinking about when we first met, and I did the little consult for you, and I
Yeah.
was trying to remember what exactly I said. And I think one of the things that I did say essentially was, Miranda, just go for it. Go with your own instincts. The heck with what everybody else tells you, because if you're going to go down in flames, you want to light your own fire. And just do what you think is right. Take all the advice, but then you got to make your choice yourself.
Yeah.
And I think you definitely did it and flourished as a result.
For sure. I think the other thing I remember, two random bits of advice too. I don't know why they stuck with me, but one of them was I was talking about subletting my office for, because I was so worried about the like $500 or $600 a month for my rent for the full-time office. And you said you're gonna make more money back by having the office available when you have to move a client or see someone in crisis or there's a holiday than you ever will by that like $100 a month to build it out, to rent it out. And I was like, you were so incredibly right. Like at every point, every time I had to move somebody or what have you, I thought, oh, this is just such a lovely thing to know that my office is my office. It was lovely. And then you gave me a piece of advice that I now tell people not to do. So we won't share that one, but at the time I was like, okay, that sounds great. And then I later trusted my intuition and business sense and went, that was terrible advice. And moved on.
That's great.
But yeah, right. Well, that's what we all do.
Right, you got to own it, right?
Yes, own it. So let's talk about in 1 minute or less, why did you decide to become a therapist?
My first career was as an educator. I was a teacher, and I'm a credentialed elementary school teacher, high school teacher, and I actually owned and ran a preschool and daycare for 11 years and directed for 4 more years after that. But in the midst of that, I realized that teaching in early childhood education was great, but clearly there's these kids who had deeper issues, and the deeper issues, more or less had to do with their families.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this kid's anxious. Well, if I had those parents, I'd be anxious too.
Right.
If my parents were separated and at war with each other, and having a tug of war over you on a regular basis, and telling more or less telling or acting in a way that said, oh yeah, your other primary caregiver is a jerk
Mm-hmm.
and a horrible person, it's really messed up. So it was like, okay, I'm doing the work, but I'm doing it on this, what felt to me on the outer edge.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get to the more to the core of it.
Yeah.
And the core of it, is that those levels, which is that not the kids, but the parents. But then eventually that also meant not necessarily just the surface things in the current life, but also the deeper issues, which has to do with trauma, attachment, and so forth. So there's a depth and substance to it.
Yeah. I love that.
I saw that.
So what, and I'm going to say this just for context, what year did you decide to become a therapist?
Um, I started my master's in '87. So
Awesome.
at that point, I had been running my schools for 9 years.
Yeah.
So I was 33 years of age, which is kind of a telling thing in that, like working with young people, it says you haven't have to be out there in the world screwing up enough, doing what you think is right and what you know for sure as a teenager that you're going to do for the rest of your life, to find out that some of it kicks you in the butt, some of it's annoying as heck, and some of it's just not as rewarding. So by then, and it was probably at least a 2 or 3 year process prior to starting the master's, where it's like, I started to realize this is not exactly what I want to do. And making that career adjustment I bit the bullet, pulled the trigger at 33 to start my master's.
Awesome. And
And
then
that's,
how long did it take between that and being fully licensed at that time?
well, my 4-year plan, which was 2 years to do my master's degree and 2 years to do the hours to get licensed, took 7 years.
Not an uncommon
Yeah.
scenario.
So I didn't get licensed until I was 40, and it seemed agonizingly long. And I often tell people that if I'd known it was going to be take that long, be that hard, I might not have done it. But totally the best thing I ever did professionally in my career. Just absolutely totally. But it's a journey I had, just like people have different journeys, and and so as it turned out, I got licensed at 40, which seems like old as heck to start a new career, but not in our field really.
No.
And here I am, I'm 68, 28 years past then, and that's just like, well, that's incidental.
It's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, how long from the point that you got licensed, how soon did you open up your own business, your own private practice? Was it immediate? Did you work for some other people for a little while? Because you were already an entrepreneur, you were already a business owner before you were licensed.
It was immediate. What I had was that in my internship at the time, when I got licensed, I think I had about 12 or more steady clients. So that instantaneously became a core for the private practice. So the private practice wasn't the full-time employment yet, because it wasn't quite enough clients. It was there were lower fees, pro bono, maybe a pro bono client or two, and so I had another job at the time. But part of the building private practice was that I was able to get the 12 or so clients beforehand. That none of them were assigned to me or given to me by my supervisor. So the self-promotion, the putting yourself out there, I've been doing all during the internship, and the private practice internship. So I got it going ahead of time. So I was able to switch quickly, where it was viable to have another part-time job rather than a full-time job.
Yeah. How long did it take to move into your practice being your primary income?
I'd say within 2 or 3 years. I say within 2 or 3 years. And the reason I hesitate to say exactly how long is because the part-time job I had that I got at an agency was started out being 20 hours a week, and by the time I left it, it was only 10 hours a week. And the last couple of years, I did it because I really liked the people, I really liked the camaraderie, but it wasn't financially beneficial to me. By then, my private practice had become solid enough that I could give it up, and so licensed in '94 and quit that other job in '98. So 4 years, but probably it was after a couple of years I didn't need to do it anymore.
Yeah. And did you ever do managed care and get paneled for insurance companies?
I did some managed care. I did 2 versions of managed care. And part of it was, first of all, I did county work, which is through the county, did Medi-Cal. And part of that was because if you get a good reputation, they throw clients all over at you. That was my experience.
Sure.
Because they also play you crap.
There's always that wonderful give and take of
right.
if you want to bill as quickly as possible, it will be at the lowest fee possible.
Right. Yeah. And they tend to be, clients tend to be flaky and no show and all that stuff. But it was also there's a population of people that I did want to work with, and I did really enjoy them a lot. And I had loads of those clients. But at the same time, at some point, became financially not, the math didn't work out in terms of time and income. But so that I did that, but I kept that longer than my other managed care. My other managed care people, I did that more as a cooperation rather than building practice, because people have have their care, and clients like therapists end up being in classes. There's the upper class who can pay for anything on their own, or they got great insurance because they're self-employed or have great coverage through their affluent work situation. And then there's a middle class, and there's a working class and a lower class. So therapists are like that, but clients are like that. And I wanted to work with that spectrum. So, and there are a lot of people had their managed care system. So it was like, if I joined a managed care situation, then they could access, their services. And I did that, and felt abused and taken advantage of, and but I did it, and it's certainly a viable way to build your practice. Yeah. But also, I was very conscious of the math being very simple, which is that it took 3 county clients to pay for 1 full fee client. Yeah. And it took at least 2 managed care clients to pay for 1 full fee client. Yeah. So the math became very simple at some point, and eventually, building up the private practice referrals, so I didn't need them. Yeah. So I was doing that as accommodation, but what told me very, very clearly that it was time to stop is that anytime I would get mail from one of the managed care people, my heart would sink. Yeah. And I would have this wave of depression. And basically my body was telling me, nah, this is not fun.
I think that
I cut it off a long time ago now.
Yeah. I think this is the part that I really struggle with, in terms of, we as therapists are taking the hit to try to make therapy accessible by accepting really crazy rates and really exploitive practices by insurance companies. While insurance companies last year, in 2020, they made, I have a piece of paper somewhere, $30 billion in profit, right? More than Amazon. Amazon made $21 billion in profit. Insurance companies made $30 billion of profit, as we are sitting there going like, we're going to make it accessible. I'm like, the way we make it accessible is that we say no to contracts that are exploitive and that are problematic, and that we advocate for legislation that says, hey, you know what? Insurance companies, you have all these rules that say that within 90 days, or within 30 days, I need to apply to give you the information so you pay me, or you're not going to pay me for the service. But then you can approve a service, pay me for the service, tell me everything's fine, and then in some cases come back 3, 5, or 7 years later and say, oh, actually, our mistake, that wasn't a thing, and we're going to take your money today, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars out of nowhere. And people are just scratching their head with no recourse. Like that, to me, those kinds of exploitive practices, we have to really fight against and make some shifts against, as opposed to just looking at, well, we'll make it accessible to people while we are then becoming the martyrs in a broken system. Anyways, off of my soapbox.
Well, there's various conceptualizations or paradigms or philosophies of doing therapy. But and one of the fundamental ones is that as a therapist, you're helping clients become empowered, to have control, mastery of their own lives, to own their own narrative, if you're looking at narrative therapy. And then, it's something counterindicative, contradictory, to feel so disempowered if you're beholden to managed care. Now, there are plenty of therapists who are almost fully dependent on managed care referrals. And this is HMO, not even PPO, but HMO situations. And they get a fraction of what I get. Now, I have, I've always had a sliding scale of some sort, so there's full fee and there's lower fee clients. But, I during the pandemic, during the quarantine, I spiked up to from my average of about 25 or so clients a week, which I've held steady for years, to over 35 a couple of weeks, which is this is crazy, too available. Yeah. But so I resettled it, remanaged it, so it's back toward, a little bit over 25, 26, But what happened was that during this time, I had colleagues who saw maybe up 1/4 to 1/3 more clients than I saw a week, who had either comparable or less income, because the math just works out. When you're getting paid, depending on what the managed care rates are, $60, $70, $80 per session versus whatever the market rate is in your area. Yeah, it's a big difference. So, and feeling so disempowered, taken advantage of, and it's like, I'm trying to help this person feel powerful and good about themselves, and I feel stepped on. So, but the other part of it is the convenience of getting the referrals and the anxiety, which you're working with people, and fear of rejection, of putting themselves off to market. So how do you counterbalance that? Well, you get yourself referrals, and that's building the private practice by building those referrals and marketing yourself.
When did you first build a website? Because when we were even when I was starting, like, having a website was relatively controversial.
Right.
So when did you start with your website, and how did you feel about the controversy?
Well, at first, having a website was a big deal, innovative and sexy. And now everybody has a website. Everybody has a website. So like I said, I resigned from the agency, my part-time job, in '98. And part of it was that I was dedicating a full day every week to putting things on my website. So that was '98. So it's probably around somewhere in the late '90s.
That's awesome.
And I have a lot of things about websites themselves, because websites, everybody has websites now. Everybody has websites, and they're often designed by a website designer who is not a therapist. So guess what? Everybody has this pretty website, with bamboo and waterfalls.
The rocks stacked.
Bamboo and waterfalls, and everybody's website says, I really, really care about clients, and I really, really try hard. Well, we all care and try hard. What's the big deal? So that's the issue about content, about marketing yourself. And I don't know if Miranda, if you've been to my website lately, but I worked on it for every Thursday for a few years, and then continue to do so. And I have enough skills that I use a cut and paste method software to design my own website. I have a huge website for a private practice practitioner. It's huge. Okay. And it's also quirky in my personality, just like my office behind me, all the funny stuff. So it's very reflective of me. And the content is key, because people will go to the website to get contact information. And there's some people, and again, so some people, just like I'm telling somebody who's trying to find love in their life, you only got to find one, so you have to touch that one person. So why you? What makes you distinctive? What makes you special? What makes it sound like you're the right person? And this is the difference in marketing, which there was a private practice person who I disagreed with fundamentally. You probably know who they are, whose emphasis was the marketing that I'm a therapist who helps women become more independent. I'm a therapist who helps men manage their relationships. And basically, it externalized what they did.
It was problem focused.
Yeah, problem focused. Niche focus also, as opposed to, I'm Ronald. I'm this human being who's a therapist, who has these capacities, abilities, personality, intelligence, and so forth. And people are referring to me, just like you and I both are licensed marriage and family therapists. Most clients don't even know what the heck that is.
Correct.
The difference between a LMFT, a LCSW, social worker, a psychologist, a LPCC, they don't know, they don't care. And often, usually, they don't even care if you're licensed or not, except in the very beginning, because they have some kind of filter. So they refer to me. So in my website, I very purposely present my personality, my sense of humor. On the page that says about Ronald, if you look at that, there's a picture of me when I was 3 years old. I always point out that's the last time I was cute. But that's purposeful. It's kind of cute. It's kind of funny, but it's also letting people know that this is me as a human being.
Yeah.
I was a kid.
Yeah.
I do have these things. So this is kind of taking that principle of self-disclosure to some degree and putting it on the website. Yeah. So that's where the content.
Which I think is so interesting, because I remember when I was coming up in the aughts, like how do you say that in the aughts? That like self-disclosure and saying anything about how you are as a therapist or what your style is or who you are as a human being was absolutely like, it was just stomped upon. I remember these big conversations, even, and I think we're both in a camp listserv together, and there would be these fiery conversations about like, how dare you share this or that detail about yourself, and put that out into the world. And it's been such an interesting space. And I personally come from the perspective of, we need to do both. We need to talk with people about like their pain and reach them where they're at, because we know that a lot of people are searching based on their pain, but we need to really figure out who we are. And I think most therapists don't know who they are, Ronald.
Right.
Like they don't know who they are or how they help.
Well, the issue of self-disclosure, and self-disclosure comes clearly from a humanistic orientation of therapy. Mm-hmm. And most of us have some humanistic orientations. And by the way, Miranda, do you ever self-disclose that you're a woman?
You know what?
I try not to let people know that I'm Chinese necessarily. Like, what the hell,
Yeah.
Or age.
Or words, like the idea of like whether you're married or not, like if you're wearing a ring or you wear glasses or whatever the details are, it's ridiculous.
Well, and humanistic orientation is that my expertise or my sense of you comes from my sense of myself. Mm. So that's kind of what you're talking about. How do you market yourself? Like, if I'm selling a car, if I don't know about the exhaust, the engine, the horsepower, the leather, the braking system, the radar, and everything, I can't market it. So a lot of when I do coaching of therapists, I poke at them and say, who are you? What are you? Mm-hmm. And how are you any good? Which is very anxiety provoking.
Yes.
For a therapist.
It is.
In fact, that's my conversation I had with that other consultant one time, is that I try to teach people to market themselves. And they actually said, oh, I used to do that, but it scares them too much. And it's like pandering to the fear. As opposed to, as therapists, we tell people, go into your fear.
And you're supposed to, and this is the part too, is that so if you don't know what your outcomes are, whether you're really helping and how you help, then how can you truly show up in the room, in that space? If you have this imposter piece, if you have this, this place of anxiety that's sitting in the room, and it's not going to help. So we take people through, like we give them scripts and say, here are the questions to ask in detail with your clients. And the questions are clinically based. They are really focused on an experience that will actually help the client see their progress. But it also gives the therapist a place of like hearing like, oh, there was progress. Oh, I'm seeing these words are being used to describe the work that we're doing, because my client can describe what I do better than I can, which is why a client referral will always be more apt to schedule with you than an internet referral, until you figure out how to basically translate what these clients are experiencing into your website, But again, it's all about the awareness. We have to dig in.
Yeah, I have a slightly more, that's more quantified and specific, which makes sense in terms of what you do. But I use these simple encompassing questions, which ironically, sometimes people have a hard time answering, which is, how does therapy work? And some people, they're kind of flustered because they don't have an answer to that. Yeah. Well, if you're a therapist, you don't even know how therapy works, then what are you doing? And then more specifically is that what is it about you that makes therapy work? And then now with that is actually can be more nuanced, which is that what is it about you that makes therapy work with this teenage boy who's smoking too much pot and getting kicked out of school? What is it about you that connects with this woman who's been going through her third breakup in the last 3 months? That makes it work, So, and then, what needs to happen? What needs to happen for what's your client looking for, and what do they need? And even though those are such generic questions, some
deep.
People are really flummoxed how to answer that.
I think 100%, because I asked those questions actually of people for years, and would have to do a lot of like digging and probing and what have you to get them to answer it. Right. And it wasn't until I started giving them a script and having them go through this qualitative process that like, then it kind of made my job like a hell of a lot easier, which is why I did it. But no, I think honestly, I've gotten on the phone with thousands of therapists and asked those questions, Ronald, and 95% of them, 95 out of 100, did not have an answer, which is just so telling in our profession and not helpful. And I think what we do is really great, but like we need to get some more understanding and insights into what we're doing.
The sarcastic part of me, ends up looking at them and says, so how do you think therapy works? It says, well, you think therapy works because you go into therapy with a client and your wonderfulness exudes out of you, and your wonderfulness somehow transfers across the room or into the camera, and they feel so wonderful that they change and grow. They stop dating assholes, or they stop drinking, or whatever else, And then people are like hurt and appalled that their wonderfulness is not enough or rejected, as opposed to, okay, even if I'm being sarcastic about your wonderfulness, let's break it down conceptually a little bit more, which is what? That has to do with attachment theory.
Yeah.
That has to do with attachment theory. That has to do with rapport. It has to do with transfers and countertransfers, which is something else, which is why, what you're doing is really useful for the practice way, but also the clinical orientation, which is that this is why experienced people are really good. It's not that a new person can't be really, really excellent in their work, but a new person who's not really experienced, they're doing good work oftentimes because they're instinctive. Because they're instinctive, and or that their personality fits well with either the particular client or the situation. But this is something that I know has happened with me, because this is decades of work now, which is sometimes something happens and it's like, whether it's clinical or marketing, and it's out of the seat of my pants. I'm like, and I do something. And when it works, it's like absolutely amazing. It's great, but it's instinctive. And instinctive is a little bit of conceptualization, but not the full canopy of the spectrum of knowledge and experience, but just a little bit. So instinct is not without background. But what happens if it works afterwards? I go, that was great. Why did that work? And basically it's called deconstructing it or conceptualizing it. And if I can conceptualize it, now I can reuse it. Where before I was reactive, now I could be proactive. So now I get a referral, or now I get this woman who says that she broke up and she has trouble with relationships, and that she's been dating meth head biker assholes one after the other. And conceptually I go, it sounds, my theory based on that is it's an attachment issue that probably has to do with having grown up with an emotionally unavailable father figure. And the therapy is in large part going to have to do with me being male, older, and an authority figure, and being intimate appropriately with good boundaries. So the whole assessment and treatment is already planned out, anticipated. And when the person shows up, I'm already activating that. I'm being appropriately paternal in some ways, but with the boundaries. And I even tell my client that, and then it works, and it's wonderful and everything else. So, but it's like after the fact you figure it out. And that's the same thing with marketing too, is that you do things instinctively that make sense. And one of the things when I talk to people about marketing is that I do marketing overtly from a clinical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That is not just about presenting yourself, having a shiny website and cute business cards and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's about how do you know yourself and how do you in a way that has clinical integrity, and that's the big issue. Is people think that marketing loses the integrity of your work.
No,
As
marketing is the first step of your informed consent. It's
Mhm.
letting people know like what they can expect when they get on the phone with you.
Mhm.
Like it's giving them a sense of like what therapy can look like. And if you give them like a good clinical education, then they're prepared to kind of show up in that experience, or again to say, oh, this isn't what I wanted. I didn't want this person who's going to do attachment work, or I want homework, or I don't want homework, or whatever the thing is. Like, here's what I know about myself. We get a chance to really help prime people to make choices that really resonate with what their intuition is telling them, and to be able to like show up versus, we go, well, this person's canceling or rescheduling all the time and they're not preparing for therapy sessions. Well, what the F does that really mean? Like in your world, right? Here's what therapy looks like, but this may be their only experience. They may have only seen therapy on television, where what do we see? Like somebody comes in, lays on the couch, complains a lot, and then sleeps with their therapist. Like that, like pisses me off every time. I'm like, every time I see a show and I'm like, please don't, please don't, please don't, please don't. Slept with your client. Like, why must you stop it? It's not helpful. Every once in a while, I've seen some places where I'm like, oh, that's actually like, for media, like that's a relatively like good representation of therapy.
Oh yeah,
like,
when it's done well, I want to jump up and down and say, "Oh, that feels real. That was beautifully done." And other times, it's like,
yeah. No, okay. So I know we're like going way over, and people are going.
Oh, by the way, I just realized I wrote a book. I wrote many books.
Yes,
and they're available as ebooks, and they're posted on my website free. So you could actually pull it off the one. And one of them is called Therapy Interruptus. Therapy Interruptus. And I think the subtitle is From the First Contact to the First Session. So it's all about marketing. And it's actually about marketing from the first contact where you're putting things out through marketing on the phone call, marketing in the first session. Because if you have a contact doesn't mean you have an appointment. No. Because you have an appointment doesn't mean somebody shows up. And when somebody shows up or you have a session, that doesn't mean you have a client yet. So there's a marketing process that goes through at least the first session to follow through on.
Yeah. And so I'm going to read off some of your books. How dangerous is this person? Assessing danger and violence potential before tragedy strikes, conflict control and out of control in couples and couples therapy. We've got books about addiction and about down the relationship rabbit hole, therapy interruptus, mirror. So we will link that in the show notes, y'all, at zinnime.com/podcast.
And don't forget my my favorite one with my favorite cover is called Scorpion in the Bed.
The
narcissist, narcissism and the narcissist in therapy, in couples therapy.
Oh man, I remember one of my colleagues, they said like, oh, if you've got a couple that has a narcissistic person, like send them to me. And I was like, oh, for sure. Like,
see, and a lot of this is, the conceptualization, marketing, and just like therapy, where people have a method or a kind of theory. And, I believe that therapy is best done through diagnosis. In other words, if I work with somebody and there's trauma, then trauma is going to influence how I'm going to do the therapy. If I work with somebody else and they had a borderline parent or a narcissistic parent, then it's going to be different. If there's cross-cultural issues, if there's an affair, if there's an addiction, if there's this or there's that. So the assessment drives the therapy rather than having a way to do therapy. And some people spend more time and energy sorting their laundry than doing assessment or diagnosis. But that's also the same in terms of marketing. But there is an aspect of it is that there are some principles to work off of, and the principles is, why should they pick you? And what makes you credible? What are they looking for? What's
Mhm.
their need? And I guess one thing to say very provocatively is that I always tell therapists, y'all are too damn positive. You market yourself as I'm gonna help you have a more authentic life. I'm gonna help you have a more quality, loving relationship full of sex. I'm gonna help your kid, do well in school. No, that's not why people go to therapy. They go to therapy because they're miserable. They go to therapy because they're going to break up and lose their relationship along with 3 kids. They're going to go to therapy or send their teenager to therapy because they're going to spiral in self-destruction. So this is basically a marketing principle. I don't know if I ever said this to you, Miranda, way back when, but that marketing has 2 principles. And 2 principles are evil, negative principles, which is you're not good enough, and what you have isn't good enough. Your car isn't cool enough, and your hair is not blonde enough.
I'm gonna disagree with this part of it. I think for me, when I think about this, if I look at the principle and what we're doing, it's that we're really validating people's pain and saying, you're not alone. We hear you and see you. Other people have experienced this, and there is help and hope, and
Right.
things can get better. And I think that piece of being able, but you have to look at what the pain is, and you have to look at the misery. You have to be able to say that out loud so someone can say like, oh shit, it's not just me. I'm not, quote unquote crazy. I'm not the only one there. I'm not inherently flawed. Like this is a normal part of the human experience. And oh, there's someone who was able to put it on a website that I could Google at 2 a.m. It's that common. And they're telling me, hey, I've helped people before. Like that's like a freaking magical superpower
Right.
that we get to do as therapists just from like knowing and empathizing with people. Okay. So I want to ask you this question.
I want to say one last thing about the empathizing and the connection.
Yeah.
The title of my private practice workshop for therapists is called I Hate Insurance Companies. Building private practice with clinical integrity. And the reason is that, and people relate to it, like you said, empathy and the connectiveness.
Yes.
It sounds like that's terrible, but
no,
yeah, how many people love insurance companies or have this same experience I have of a wave of depression? So that's being tuned in, know. And so as you're tuned in, and that sounds negative, but the integrity of it is that you work with the anxiety and the negativity, but you take it to the positive as well.
Yeah.
So that's
you have to be, as long as we're not just selling them something that we don't need, we need to be able to refer out with integrity and say, that's not something I can help with. We need to manage expectations. We need to close and terminate with people when they're done with therapy, damn it. And the amount of therapists that don't know how to tell when someone's done or how to have that conversation and say goodbye, it's a little bit too high for me, but that's my own little soapbox too. Okay. So let's say there was someone like you who was in that place of transitioning a little bit older to to this new career. What would be your biggest piece of advice to that person starting out?
The biggest piece of advice, well, it starts off with is like, knowing yourself, the things we talked about, terms like what makes you, why do you want to do therapy? How does therapy work? What is it about you that is going to be more efficient, more competent, more special, in relating, and it's more than just caring about clients. So there's that part of it, which is pretty internal. And then the marketing is, there's only a few ways to do marketing. There's advertising, which generally doesn't work.
Yeah.
Advertising generally works, which includes websites, but now for the most part, and we could disagree on that one too.
We could disagree on that, but I have a lot of data that says that websites do work.
So it depends. Maybe there's a nuance, but advertising, but then the content, this is where the content really matters. So there's advertising, there is networking, there is writing, getting published, and there's doing presentations and trainings. Okay. And I've done all of them. And there's also managed care, sell your soul to the devil. But I've done all of them. But to me, the best way to do it is doing trainings and workshops. Because when you do a training or a workshop, whether it's video or in person, the person sits there and watches you for an hour or more going, who is this? Who's this Miranda character? She seems interesting. She seems kind of smart, sense of humor, personable. And then maybe your therapy stories, start showing some substance and sophistication. So you get scouted out. Now, the writing is useful because it creates content, but then depends on who's going to read it. The networking can be very powerful, in terms of like, because I can't see any more clients. It's just impossible. And it's hard for me to refer because I got to really know and trust somebody to refer.
Yes. It's networking is not something, I think it's all about the way, right? Because you'll meet people who have done advertising, who've done writing, who've done workshops, who have done networking, what have you. And they will say, oh, that didn't work for me, because they weren't taught how to do it effectively. Right. And that, like, going to an event and shoving business cards at people is never going to build your practice. It's always going to be having relationships with people who like, know, and trust you in a deep way. Like that's.
I think that's one of the ways that I think we met online, but also we met at the conferences. And I dearly miss the conferences because of the quarantine stuff. But that's where, like, I get to talk therapy, shop with other therapists and get all excited about it. And then, then I'll take a card from somebody who I had a really good talk with. It was interesting, provocative. That's different networking. Yeah. So there's a part of presenting yourself and marketing, which is, and this is part of networking. Networking is whenever you're out. Yeah. Whenever you're out.
Yeah.
Standing in line to get on an airplane.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, if you're sitting next to me on an airplane, you're going to get a whole hour or more, the whole flight. At some point, it's going to come up. So, oh yeah, I'm a marriage family therapist, and And then I have this little trick where, especially if I'm standing, but even when I'm sitting, where, or if I'm on an airplane, I put it in this pocket here on my chest. Otherwise, it's in my left-hand pocket. And I have this real trick while I'm talking. I reach in and I get a card and I just pass it to the person while we're talking. And of course, they take it. So there's a kind of a relentlessness to that. And that's really important because you don't know what will come up. And things have come out of that. It's not a one-to-one correspondence by any means. But, since I do the business cards, and I've gone through thousands and thousands of them. 1,000 a month, 1,000 a year. Easy. Oh, it's like a month. Jesus, bro. They end up in landfill and everything else, but the one that comes back is the one that matters. Yeah. So the networking is useful, but you have to actually, know how to present yourself. That's marketing.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to, and I know we do have to wrap up, but it goes back to that knowing thyself. Like, you have to explore and know yourself and be able to talk about what you do. And I think even more than with confidence, with passion, like that really basic thing. And I think one of the ways that we got to know each other was through camp chapter experiences. Like, I was on a camp chapter board. I think you were, I think there was like some of the leadership meeting things and some of those conferences. That's like getting on a camp board, and the chapter perspective really helped me to kind of meet other people who were leaders at various levels or what have you. And I'm sure for you, even as like like you're on the camp board of the state, has probably given you places to make other relationships and connect with people.
The other really key thing, which is really important to point out, is that since so many therapists, MFTs in particular, are doing career transition change, that means that they tend to be, a lot of times on the older side, not in their 20s, but 30s, 40s, maybe 50s, even 60s. But they also come from other careers. Yeah. So how to take advantage of the career? So my career was in education and child development. So in the child development world, I'm a hot commodity in the sense that I'm familiar with the early childhood education world, the child development world, and I'm a therapist.
Yeah.
So when you can, straddle those two areas, then
like when you
amongst
know
therapists,
yourself and your skills, it's powerful. I think it, like going back to like the theme that I'm hearing from you is it's all about like that self-knowledge is just the integral foundation for what you're doing clinically as well as the business side of things, just really knowing thyself.
and what happened for me was that later on, I started doing training for therapists, you know, which was really cool. It was like very impactful for personally my ego, feeling like, okay, other therapists will listen to me. That's really cool,
Yeah.
you know. But before I did that, I did lots and lots of work with parents, but particularly teachers, early childhood educators, where there it was like, oh, I'm already, you know, what they, I'm the toy in the Happy Meal. It's what's called in marketing added value.
Yeah.
Because I have the expertise. So now that actually turned out where I actually made, and I still do, make significant income as a trainer in the early childhood world, Head Start, and so forth. And here's these people sitting there watching me for hours, and that becomes a referral source, you know. So where you come from, what you've experienced, how can you use that where becoming a therapist gives added value? So if you were in union work, which is one of my students does that. If you were a teacher, if you were working in some company in business and so forth, you know, that's a natural place for you to you know, show people the issues, the bridging of the issues. So you to exploit that, and it becomes really significant in terms of credibility and marketing. So find out what your previous journey was, what those contacts were, and if you can do trainings, that's a really big deal. Otherwise, you know, it is you know, I would say primarily networking. You know, yeah, I guess get a good website, and you know, I have a great website, but it's there's different orientations to that.
Yeah.
Writing is nice, but and this one other thing I would say is that a lot of people, yeah, I know, Miranda, this whole thing is that you open my mouth and I just keep on talking.
I'm like, I gotta go to the bathroom soon, Ronald.
Okay.
And I gotta
but,
at the very least.
One thing I've seen with therapists is that a lot of times they do what they need to do to build their practice, but they don't do it consistently.
Yeah.
You know, and you more or less almost have to do it consistently, compulsively. You know.
I think I'm gonna do the wrap up because I do want to make sure, but I want to definitely validate that. I think what happens is that therapists do not create space and time for the business aspects of running their practice. And so then it means that as they ebb and flow with their caseload, the process of actually working on their business ebbs and flows. And so then they say like, oh, nothing is consistent, and they haven't created passive ways to advertise their practice. Right. And you're right. Like a website on its own doesn't do anything magical for your practice. But if your website is built on being findable for what people are searching for, and you know that 720 people a month are searching for this phrase in your area in particular, and you're the first person that they see, and then you have a message that speaks to that pain, that's magical. So that's a place where we can take our writing skills, and also then people will reach out to you for speaking engagements. There's so many options there. So check out ronaldma.com and his plethora of free publications for you to check out. If you are looking for more support in growing your practice, of course, we have 10 hours of free training from zinnyme.com that you can check out. Also, if you're trying to figure out your practice starting or growing or revamping a solo or group private practice, check out our Business School Bootcamp for Therapists. We will walk you through every aspect, clinically, business, relationally, personally, mindset, to creating a practice that really, truly works for you and your clients. Until next time, y'all. Thank you, Ronald.
See you later.